Welcome to the Thrive Today podcast. I'm Natalie Bourne. I'm the media host for Thrive Today and the founder of Innovation Meets Leadership. We are a platform for women who lead and believe. And today we are so excited to have Deborah Stricklin back. She is an author, a Bible teacher. She's also a professional coach, certified, and she's the founder and president of Deborah Stricklin Ministries. And she's an ordained minister in the Assemblies of God. So we're so excited to be with her today. And she is not, a stranger to our platform by any means, but her and her husband, Jeff, have been serving in their home church in their community for over 31 years. That is such an incredible legacy. Welcome to the podcast, Deborah.
Hi, Natalie, and hello, Thrive Today women. It's so great to be back with you today.
Well, I love following you, and we're going to give people an opportunity to follow you at the end of this episode, Deborah. But I was following you and you posted some stuff that I was like, oh my gosh, we have to have her come back on and talk to us a little bit about some of the things you've been posting around. But before we get into that, I would just love the women out there to learn a little bit more about you and maybe some of the twists and turns in your journey and how you got into ministry in the first place.
Well, I grew up in Southern California. And my mom told me that I asked the Lord into my heart when I was 3 years old. I don't remember that, but I remember loving the heroes of the Bible. I remember reading as early as I possibly could all the stories in the Old Testament in particular. And along about sixth grade, about the time that I was 12 years old, the Lord really began to impress upon my heart that I needed to rededicate myself to Him, that it needed to be my story. My salvation needed to be my story. And so I gave my heart all over again to Him and was water baptized at that point. And my world began to open up at that point. And we were attending church in Southern California. And actually, John Maxwell was our pastor. The Thrive Today women are very familiar with him. Yes. And he was my pastor all the way through my middle school years, my high school years, and my early college years. And so there was just a lot of downloading of leadership principles that I didn't know that I was learning, but I was observing and intaking all of that. And then when my husband and I, after we married, we moved to the Kentucky area for a couple of years and then moved to Nashville. And when we actually went back to Kentucky for a couple of years when our children were young. And that's where God began to truly get a hold of my heart regarding missions. And as I remembered back from when I was a small child, missionaries would come into our church and they would tell us about what God was doing in the world. And I didn't know at that time that God was actually planting seeds in my heart for what He wanted to do in the future. And I got the opportunity to take a trip to India about 12 years ago with our church on a missions trip. I just decided that I needed to go, and it was a God moment. And so God began to weave all of those things together. And where I stand today is literally the beginning of the harvest of those seeds that were planted.
Wow, that's such a beautiful story. And I love hearing this prompt that God was leading you to India. Was that your first mission trip when you went to India, or had you been on other mission trips before that?
I remember going into Mexico. It was not a missions trip. It was actually, I take that back. It was in middle school. It was a missions trip in Mexico and then to India. And then I got the opportunity to actually go back to Mexico with my son as he was a senior in high school. So those are just the touch points.
Yeah, that's beautiful. And something in you sparked, like you had the Mexico, trips, you had the India trip, and something in you really sparked for international ministry, which, people go on mission trips all the time, but it's a little different when God just grabs a hold of your heart in a certain area.
Absolutely. And being in India was a completely different experience from anything I'd ever seen, the sights, the smells. And yet God was, like I said before, just planting a seed. I didn't know that Pakistan was on my horizon. I had no idea, but God was opening my heart.
Wow. A lot of people have not spent time in India. I actually have been to India a couple times, mostly for business. I actually did the tail end of my MBA in India as well. So I have a lot of interactions and with India. What was it like for you? So one, I'd love to know, what part of India did you go to? And then what was it like engaging with India for the first time? Maybe helping our listeners, get a little bit of a visual of what that was like and what you saw while you were there.
Our destination was Chennai.
Okay.
And the purpose of our trip was to go to the orphanage that our church was supporting. And so I got the opportunity to spend time with children there in Chennai in particular. But we would go out into the city area and just traveling in a vehicle through the streets of India where people were on, motorcycles, 2 and 3 people on each motorcycle, zooming in and out of traffic. The smells were completely different from anything that I had experienced here in the United States. But what it began to teach me was that the need of every person for Christ is the same, no matter where we are in the world. And my heart, like I said, began to enlarge for what God was doing in the world.
That's beautiful. I can, as you describe all that, I feel like I'm there with you in that car, like with the motorcycles weaving in and out. I mean, it's so beautiful. You talk a little bit, and I think you actually wrote an article in a magazine about beginning to actually sponsor a child. Talk a little bit about what led you kind of further down your missions path to where you eventually decided, okay, I'm going to sponsor a child in another country.
These two subjects almost feel like two parallel subjects in my life that God brought together to a point. And I just had no idea, which is all about what a God story is. So when my children were young, this was when we were living in Kentucky for a couple of years. At our church, there was a sponsor program that came in. And so this was probably 26 years ago or so, 28 years ago. And on that table, there was spread out all the children's pictures. And I went and I picked out this cute little boy, and he was only 3 years old at the time. And the sponsor program had named him Ivan, which later we found out that his name is actually Juan, but they named him Ivan for protection purposes. And so I took that picture, and the Holy Spirit spoke to me at that moment. And he said, I know that you are concerned about your own children getting a Christian education and how expensive that is in the United States. But if you will sponsor this child, if you'll invest, if you'll plant the seeds in this child's life, I will take care of yours.
Wow.
And for 14 years, that little picture and new ones as they came along hung on our refrigerator. And we prayed for Ivan, and my children knew of God's promise to us.
Wow.
It was never easy educating my own children in Christian education. It was expensive, or periods of homeschooling when we couldn't afford Christian education. And one way or another, they went all the way through their school years, growing up under the authority of Christ, either in private Christian school or in homeschooling. And God was so faithful to do exactly what he said he would do. So the year that Ivan graduated from high school, our son, also our youngest, graduated from high school. And it was as if that was the end.
Wow.
It felt okay. We had done what we were supposed to do. We had been obedient, and this child is now launched, and he can go on and follow God's calling in his life. And so we lost touch for about 8 years. And then all of a sudden on Facebook, I got a message, and it said, did you sponsor a child in Nicaragua? I am Ivan. And I just broke out into tears, and I thought, how is it, God, that you have brought this back around again? I remember standing in my kitchen with his little picture and asking the Lord, Father, one day, if you wouldn't mind, may I meet him face to face?
Yes.
I thought I'd have to travel to Nicaragua to do it, but I thought, well, I'm going to turn this over to you, Lord. and there he was. And so I told my husband, I don't care what it takes. We're going to go to his graduation. We found out he was in seminary in South Texas.
Wow.
So we were going to go to his graduation. And in December, we got to do that. And then just last week, he came to Nashville to our home and stayed with us for a week. And he got to meet his brothers and sisters. And it has just been God moment after God moment. What a blessing.
Oh my gosh. I cannot. So I sponsor a child in Nicaragua as well. And I cannot imagine, one, the story of being able to look back and see your faithfulness of sponsoring them year over year. But then in addition to that, them reaching out, you getting to engage with them twice now. What a God story of how he took the heart of missions, the heart of children, and just weave those together into this sponsor child. It's so beautiful. And I'm stunned at what God will do if we'll just give him our yes.
Absolutely. The idea of planting seeds and waiting for God to bring the harvest. Oftentimes the process gets interrupted because we don't stay faithful through that planting season. And the beauty of being able to see the harvest now, I'm a believer all over again in God's seed time and harvest.
Wow. Oh, so beautiful. And tell us a little bit about him. Like, what is he like? So obviously he's going into the ministry.
Yes. So he actually, after he graduated from high school, he actually went into college as a radiology professional in Nicaragua. And then God called him into the ministry. And so he said, okay, when he's finished with that, he asked, Lord, where do you want me to go? And God pointed out this seminary in Texas. It is a whole nother story of a walk of faith of how he got there. He literally showed up on the doorstep of the university with his student visa in hand, and he had no more money. He had used everything on a bus ticket from the airport in Dallas. And how God provided every semester for him is just the most amazing thing. This is before he found us on Facebook. And so other people were sowing into his life as well. Just, it's amazing story after amazing story after amazing story. And he's a musician as well. His love is guitar. And he asked me when he was here last week, he said, would you take me to one of the guitar stores in Nashville? I know that Nashville's famous for them. And I said, yes. And so we went over to the guitar store, and we were standing there in a sound room with all these guitars hanging all over the wall. And I looked at him with a guitar in hand, and he looked at me and he said, the first guitar I ever had, the one I learned to love to play on, was the one you gave me when I was 10 years old. For my birthday. I about just couldn't stand it. That was it was like the whole week was like that. Just amazing moment after amazing moment of God's faithfulness, of God saying to me, I want you to see the harvest of what you sowed into. And today he is working with a church planter in Nebraska and getting ready to launch his own church.
Wow. You know, it's so interesting to me that God connected you, your family, with him. And some of the fruit of his life is that he's serving God with all his heart, that he's entered into the ministry. And, you know, in some ways, I don't think we understand or realize or can even wrap our mind around the impact that we can have, even from a distance, through your prayers, through your, financial support. I don't think we really understand the eternal impact we can have on someone. But to me, this is that perfect picture of just being faithful, putting one foot in front of the other, not knowing the outcome, and then being able to look at what God can do with your faithfulness.
We have to live with a sense of faith, a sense of not being able to see the outcome of the things that God is asking us to invest in today. That is what faith is. And as Christians, as people who are filled with the Holy Spirit, this ought to be normal fare for us. And yet oftentimes we'll shy away from planting because we don't immediately see a harvest.
Yeah. This is an incredible story. I'd love for you to kind of just catch us up, because you not only do you have this story, but you also you minister through Pakistan. You touched on that just a little bit. Kind of fast forward us from India into Pakistan and kind of how you got involved there. Because again, what I really want people to hear today is that life is not linear. Like there's so many twists and turns in life, and what you end up doing and what God calls you to do, it doesn't always look like the season you're in necessarily, but again, that faithfulness of putting one foot in front of the other, taking one step at a time, he can just unfold some incredible things. You also do some work in Pakistan. I'd love to unpack that a little bit too.
About 10 years ago, I had started writing, and I published the first 4 books. I was speaking at conferences, and the Lord said to me, I want you to turn this into a nonprofit. Mm-hmm. And I said, God, I don't know how to do that. And don't you have to have a cause to have a nonprofit? He said, you do it, and I will bring you the cause. And so I faithfully did what he asked me to do, and I received nonprofit status. And shortly after that, I was introduced to a pastor in Pakistan from a friend of mine who has a worldwide ministry. And he began asking me to do women's conferences and women's Bible studies online. And so I started doing that. And then he asked, would you start a school of ministry? Today, that school of ministry has over 60 students in it that we are training to go into ministry all over the nation of Pakistan. Wow. And then we also he asked me after that, could we start a sewing school for women, a sewing training center, because the women need entrepreneurial opportunities there. And so we have 2 sewing centers now where women go to learn for 6 months at a time, and they get biblical training as well. And then they graduate with a sewing machine that we provide for them, and they can go on and start their own businesses. But the one that's really the part of the ministry that truly just lights me up is we have 2 children's schools. And we just recently were able to buy the property. It's called St. John's School. We were able to buy that property, and now we are renovating it for the children. We have over 250 children in that school. We have 10 administrators and teachers. And then we also have a second school, the Education Coaching Center, that we were given that land, and we built a building on that land. And we have about 80 students in that school and teachers. And these children who were working with their parents in the brick kilns, and they didn't even have an opportunity to go to school. They are being educated under the authority of Christ. And so you can begin to see how these things now have woven together. The seed that was planted in Ivan's life, that he could go to a Christian school in the nation of Nicaragua. My own children, the promise came to pass that they were educated under the authority of Christ. And now we have the opportunity for over 350 kids so far in the nation of Pakistan, where they're being educated under the authority of Christ. I'm just blown away by what God is doing.
Wow, this is so powerful. And I want the women to hear this in your story, that the simplicity of yes, which is actually not very simple, but it's a simple word, but sometimes it can be hard to do, and it can be a little bit of this tug of war. But the simplicity of a yes in your heart and what God can do with that, and that is such a beautiful story. That, and what it makes me realize is when you're faithful with little, when you're faithful with the one, he'll give you more. And so that faithfulness over all those years, not only with your own children, but with Ivan, and how he was able to turn that into what you're doing today. I would love if you would just encourage the women, because I know there's some women that are listening, and God has placed a dream in their heart. He has maybe even told them to do some things, but maybe they're just sitting on it and they haven't moved. And I would just love for you to encourage them a bit.
Yes. When God asks us to move forward, it is always in faith. And so there's an element of not being able to see what the outcome is going to be planting seeds when you don't know what the harvest is going to look like. And yet the key is that we trust the one that we're following implicitly, so that when he speaks to us and he gives us instructions, that we willingly do what he's asked us to do, not knowing exactly what the outcome will be. And for instance, when I was writing, when I started speaking, I thought that's the direction God was going to go with me. And yet he changed course. And if I had not said yes to that, I would have been coming against the plans and purposes that he really had intended for me. And I would not have experienced the full harvest of those seeds that were planted so long ago. So I encourage each of us to continue to just say yes and to trust the one who is leading us.
That's so good. Thank you so much for your encouragement and just for letting us glean from your story. When I think about your story, I think there's so much out of your story that we can glean into our own life, of just putting one foot in front of the other, being faithful, trusting God. And I love that you said this many times for us to hear it, which is, so much of the journey is faith. And you're not going to know what the 5 next steps are, but he'll show you what the step is to take right in front of you. And when you do that, when you're faithful with it, he'll give you more, and he'll put you over other things if you're faithful over the small. So tell us a little bit about how can we partner with your ministry? How can we find and follow you? What does that look like?
DeborahStricklin Ministries.com is the website, and on there are a myriad of things to look at, the different aspects of the ministry. And I'm on Facebook under Debbie Stricklin, and also on Instagram, Deborah Stricklin Ministries. So I would love for anyone who would like to follow the journey, the story, it would be great.
Yeah, please follow Deborah. She is such an encouragement. Her account is such an encouragement. And, I just love what she posts. And look, in today's day and age, you need to be putting good things into your heart and mind. And so give her a follow. But also, if you feel led to support what she's doing, head over to DeborahStricklin Ministries.com to support what's going on in Pakistan. This is an incredible opportunity to change a generation. And I love that this is going forward, this type of work. So thank you for your time today, Deborah. This has been so incredible to talk to you.
Natalie, thank you so much for allowing me to share my story.
Absolutely. Well, ladies, let me ask you a question. If you haven't gotten into community yet, what are you waiting for? Head over to thrivetoday.com to learn more. We will coach, champion, and challenge you to move up to the next level in whatever you're doing in life, whether it's in ministry or business. Head over to thrivetoday.com to learn more, and we'll see you next time. And don't forget to thrive.